Okay, so before I can talk about the future, I want to start with what we know now and where we're going to be in the next few years. So one of the major trends that's happening right now is, as a population, we are moving away from rural to urban. And in fact, it was 2007 when we really made the switch from rural to urban. And this is a big deal because before this, all of human history was experiencing a rural lifestyle. So by 2050, we're actually projected to be at 70% for urban populations. And just to compare, we're at about 54% right now. Now, why this is a big deal is because we need to change our entire infrastructure, our supply chain, our business model for food as we move into urbanization. So prior to World War II, we really grew our own food. We were fairly self-sufficient and lived a subsistent lifestyle, which meant we really only thought about the next few days ahead, as opposed to abundance. As opposed to now, where we are completely dependent on going to a third party to get our food. And this happened because we had huge advancements in freezing and canning technology. So this all happened after World War II, following the war, where we took technology used then and applied it to our food system. Now imagine if you used to grow your own food and then you see a can of beans. You're probably going to be a little hesitant to actually get that food. So what happened was there was a lot of advertisements to promote processed foods and canned foods. So you'll see here, for example, on the second one here, homemade, no work, no worry, no failures, no waste. It was very attractive for people, and especially women, to start relying on processed food for themselves. It was also during this time that nutritional science really came on the scene. So as you can see, nutrition then was a little skewed. Jell-O for salads, and Domino sugar cane claiming to be healthier than apple. So what happened was we had a transition from generations passing down food knowledge and recipes and growing methods to it really being co-opted by organizations. As you can see here, the Can Opener Cookbook. So we really moved away from whole foods, nutritious foods, and growing foods for ourselves to foods from organizations and corporations. Really, we went from being people to being consumers, which meant we consumed a lot more processed items, and this includes meat. So between, if you're looking at comparisons between the rest of the world and industrial countries like Canada is already doubling its meat consumption, but in about 70 years, we've nearly doubled even that. So our appetite is fairly insatiable right now. We went from having meat 1 day a week to nearly 3 days a week. Okay, so what's the problem? We went from rural to urban, our populations are growing. Yes, we need new infrastructure. What does this really mean for our food system? Well, it's a problem because we need agricultural land mass the size of Brazil to feed our population by 2050. But this land mass does not exist today, which means that it certainly will not exist 30 years from now. We also know that production of some foods over others, like meat versus plant, it's much more resource intensive. And that's because of the way we produce our food. So we really borrowed it from the Fordism era, from car manufacturers, and this is exactly how we produce our food today. So crops are done through monoculture farming, which is one crop on one field, and animals are reared through intensive animal husbandry and factory farming. It's really only a couple of companies now that have taken over the food system. So prior to World War II, we had a lot of people growing their own food. There was a lot of small farmers. It was very dispersed. But today it's very centralized, and it's really only a food oligarchy that's taking over. And with a food oligarchy means that these companies can create their own rules, which is usually based on mass production, because it's all about efficiency, because really this food system is about profit. So we're left right now with a system that is globalized, it is very central, dominated by a few companies, it's industrialized, mechanized, automated, and most importantly, privatized. Now, this has led to extensive environmental and human health impacts. A couple, loss of biodiversity. It's actually the #1 cause of biodiversity loss, agriculture, pesticide use, soil erosion, antibiotic resistance, and so on. So let's take a closer look at the numbers. Looking at land use and agriculture, right now, about a quarter of the Amazon rainforest has been deforested for cattle crop production. 40%, or nearly 40%, of Earth's ice-free land is used just for grazing. And about a third of our land has already been desertified, which means that soil is not usable for growing food. Looking at emissions, believe it or not, advisors from the World Bank have concluded that our system is responsible, or our food system is responsible for 51% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, that would mean that agriculture is the leading cause of climate change. And this is a problem, especially because of methane. So there's a lot of methane in our agricultural system, and over a 20-year period, methane is 86 times the global warming potential of carbon. And looking at water, our use is insatiable as well. About 70% of all fresh water consumed is used for agriculture, and by 2048, we're looking at potentially fishless oceans. With animals, we're eating about 70 billion a year globally, and it's an extra shame, I'd say, because pigs are one of the smartest animals in the world. Now, how does this impact people? Well, because of all the antibiotic use in our agricultural system, we've built a resistance to antibiotics that would have helped us with things like strep throat, but now we have superbugs. Also, we have starvation across the world, but 40% of all grain produced goes to feeding cattle. And more timely, according to the United Nations Food and Agricultural Association, or organization, I should say, about 70% of all new infectious diseases will come from our animal food system. And of course, that includes COVID-19. So put aside any conspiracy theories you might have about this particular disease. Let's go back and look at SARS, mad cow, and swine flu. That all came from our food system. The World Health Organization has also classified meat, particularly processed meat, as group 1 carcinogenic. And this is the same group as tobacco and asbestos. And this study came out in 2015, so it's a fairly new discovery. So how did this all happen? We have a food system that is clearly bad for us and for the planet. So why did we get to this point? A lot of the reason was because of biased farm subsidies. So governments, for whatever reason I can get into later, I'm sure, have chosen to support meat and dairy over other farming aspects like organic or vegetable growing. So it's actually made it very cheap to buy these items, which is why when you go to McDonald's, it's maybe $2 for a burger, but if you were to go to a grocery store for a salad, it's a lot more expensive. There's also lack of regulation in our food system because it really is a corporate game right now, as opposed to what it used to be. And we have become what I call a de-skilled consumer. So a de-skilled consumer is people that really don't know what they're looking for anymore. We don't know where food is made, how it's grown. For example, is soy healthy? Can we eat eggs? Is keto okay? All these questions that we have no answers to, so we just keep buying based on advertisements. And it's advertisements like this where we see, oh, beautiful cows are grazing, great. But really, this is not how farming is done. 99% of our meat comes from factory farming that looks a bit more like this. In fact, we're so distant from our food system that 22% of British adults are unaware that bacon comes from pigs. And that's because we've normalized some of the language. So we've really disassociated it. So animals equals meat, cows is steak and beef, again, bacon with pigs, veal baby cow. And we've also normalized processed food and getting food for convenient reasons. So in hospitals, we're seeing McDonald's. At stores and malls, we're also seeing fast convenience foods as opposed to whole foods. And just to reiterate, so the reason why this is an issue is because fast food and these foods require fast farming methods, which is that mass production farming. And we only have, as we know, 12 years, now 11 years, being bombarded with the fact that climate change is a real problem. It's also a problem because as we become more vulnerable to our weather system, our supply chain is now affected. In Canada especially, we get a lot of our fruits and vegetables from California and Mexico. So if we were to have droughts or forest fires in those areas, we are then left vulnerable as a nation. So what is the solution? We need to stop competing with nature and we need to start partnering with nature. We need to focus on the health of our soil. We need to grow more than one crop on one field. We need to have our system that is holistic as opposed to reductive. And most importantly, our food system needs to be about people and not profit. So one way to do this is through urban agriculture. And as I mentioned, 70% of us will be living in an urban center by 2050, which means that we need to start farming in an urban center as well. So urban agriculture includes many methods, but an example would be community gardens, rooftop gardens, laneway growing, and one of the bigger trends is vertical farming. Now, vertical farming is usually done indoors through controlled environment agriculture, which simply means that all of the elements that it takes to grow the food is completely controlled. So humidity, temperature, lighting, and so on. And this is usually carried out through soilless farming practices like hydroponics, aquaponics, and aeroponics. So just to quickly go through, hydroponics is when, let's say, you have roots of a plant that's kind of dangling in this nutrient solution. Aquaponics is more of a symbiotic relationship with fish. So imagine a big fish tank, as you can see up on the screen, where fish are at the bottom, plants at the top, and through the natural elements, they have a symbiotic relationship. And then aeroponics is more of like a spritz of the nutrient solution, so it's not much water involved. And of course, we need to look at sustainable farming methods for future farming. So that includes organic, local, and of course, growing your own when you can. So what are the benefits of some of the things I mentioned? Well, in the city of Detroit, they did a study and found that if just 20% of fresh food was grown in the city, it would create up to 5,000 jobs. Property values also go up. It was found that in New York City, one community garden would create a property value of $2 million for all surrounding properties in a 1,000-foot ring. And in cooler climates as well, like Canada, up to 40% reduction in heating and cooling loads if you were growing food indoors. Another benefit, of course, is our resource use. So if we're looking at urban ag, and if we're looking especially at controlled environment agriculture or growing indoors, we're using up to 95% less water than traditional means. Zero pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, because of course you're indoors, so you're not going to have flies flying up to 7 feet tall or 7 floors tall. And of course, there's year-round crop production because it's completely controlled, and this is very beneficial in an unstable climate. Another benefit, and this is if you're growing your own food, would be a study showing that you actually eat more fruits and vegetables if you're growing them. There's a decrease in chronic health risks and food literacy, among other things. So those are some suggested solutions, but what are some emerging trends that we're seeing? Well, of course, controlled environment agriculture, but more importantly, we're seeing that inclusion with robotics and AI. So everything is monitored, everything is smart, everything is controlled, and will be automated. Another big trend is using our land more wisely. So we're looking at farming in untraditional ways, which includes floating farms, and this is one that's proposed for New York. There's also growing underwater, which is really cool. This is in Italy that they're trying to navigate this now. In vitro meat or lab grown meat is also a huge trend. In fact, by 2040, consultants say that 60%, so more than half of all of the meat that we eat globally will either be plant-based or grown through cultured lab meat. We also know, we heard for a while, that insect protein is on the rise, and this is especially true in Asian countries and coming over to us now. It's a bit new for us, but I'm sure it'll hit us very soon. On the consumer side of trends, we've seen transparency. So really we've become woke as a society, or a bit more, to how our food system is operating and some of the negative impacts of it. So much so that we are seeing in grocery stores, organic area and vegan area is much bigger. There are also more farmers markets, and we're seeing that restaurants are dedicated just to plant-based living. In fact, in 2018, veganism was one of the biggest trends, and it continues to rise globally. And we're seeing that through the market shift. Everything from Hellmann's to McDonald's is offering vegan options. When A&W first came to Canada, it sold out almost immediately, so we know that there is a want here. We're seeing this also with Burger King, Pizza Hut, and most recently, again, Maple Leaf Foods here in Canada is doing a 50-50 burger, which is very interesting, where it's half plant-based and half beef, just to help with the transition. And so moving away from some of the consumer side of this, we're seeing around the world For example, in Switzerland, there's a think tank called Sentience Politics, and they are fighting for the ban of factory farming. We're also seeing in Germany an entire political party dedicated to this. And in Russia, there's an entire apartment complex just for vegetarians. It's the first in the world. Continuing this trend, in the Netherlands, many countries are asking their citizens to reduce their meat consumption. Schools in the States have added a vegan menu, and the German government has banned meat in all of its functions. And here in Canada, we've also seen a change just with our food guide alone. So this most recent food guide is the first time that it has not had intervention from any industry. And we can see there's a big change here because at the bottom with our red band, they've actually removed red meat. But what's more interesting is they've added tofu for the first time, soy, and beans or legumes in the meat alternative section. So this was done completely by nutritionists as opposed to corporations, which has been done in the past. And in terms of the scientific community, we are seeing a big focus on this as well. So Elizabeth Blackburn is a Nobel Peace Prize winner. And she did a study and found that in just 3 months, a vegan diet can turn on genes that prevent disease and turn off genes that prevent or that cause diseases such as cancer. Now, this is a huge revelation. Following that, Oxford University also did a study and found that hypothetically, if everyone were to go vegan tomorrow, we would save more than 8 million human lives by 2050 and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 66%. So how do we disrupt the system that we have now that I spoke about briefly at the top? One that is a food oligarchy, one that is corporately driven, one that is centralized. How do we disrupt it? It's a little cheesy to say, but we really do have to vote with our dollar right now, because right now we are consumerists until we move back into food sovereignty. So as a consumerist, we need to look at supporting our small and local farmers. We need to demand transparency and accountability in our supply chain. We need to see food as a right. It's not a product. We need it to live, so we need to treat it that way. We need to start growing in an urban context, and we need to do it in a resilient and sustainable manner. So one case study, this is out of Bolivia. It's actually this year that they're one of the newest countries to be completely food independent. So that means that they do not need to bring in food, export food, or import food for their citizens. They can feed their own people themselves, which a lot of countries cannot do now with the rise of globalization in the 80s. And this next one I'm very excited to share with you all. This is actually the first time I'll be talking about it. Through the Transformation Initiative, we have developed a program that's really a nod to the victory gardens of World War I and World War II, where the government of Canada and the US mandated that its citizens grow food to help with the war efforts and to help with the Allied forces. So in Canada alone, we grew 200,000 victory gardens and 57,000 tons of vegetables. And then in the 90s, there was a movement that came out through peasant farming, especially in South America, from La Via Campesina, and they started a movement around food sovereignty, which is food for the people, by the people, and really the right for food safety. So with that in mind, we've developed something called sovereignty gardens. So in just north of Toronto, we're working with municipalities to encourage residents to grow their own food and donate it to food banks. Because with COVID-19 right now, there's obviously a capacity issue. So we want to bring back a local food movement, bring back the skills of farming, and bring back the right to healthy food, one that is not necessarily governed by corporations. So with all that in mind, knowing that we're headed to urban centers, knowing that we have a growing population, knowing that our current food system is causing severe damage to our health and to the environment, what is the future of food? Well, I believe that the future of food, it will be nationalized just for the sake of supply chain management. It will also become a bit more decentralized and local because I think we're going to have a lot more food actors entering the system as opposed to how it's been the last 50 years. We will likely have plant-based food for the consumption side and for proteins. I mean, there is protein in plants, but aside from that, we'll likely have insect protein and lab-grown meat. It will also be indoors, smart and controlled, so for year-round production and for safety, and it will be resilient with its resources and in an urban environment. So what can you do today? I've shared a lot. I think that the first step is don't believe me, do your own education, look it up, watch some great films like Food Inconspiracy or The Game Changers, reduce your consumption of meat and animal byproducts, support local and organic, grow indoor and outdoor where you can, and read your food labels. So thank you very much. I look forward to this discussion with you now. Oh, question, great. Isn't a big part of the problem the amount of food going? Yes, it is. So a big part of the problem is our food waste, but I think the bigger part of the problem is how we see food in general. We see it more as a product. We see it as something that is almost an inconvenience to us. So it's like a grab and go situation. It's not a priority anymore. So we need to start seeing food as something that's valuable, and we do need to change our eating behavior. And I think once we do that, that's when companies respond to what we're choosing as consumers. Next question. Do you have examples of innovations in soil protection? It's actually not innovation so much as it's going back to our roots. The biggest problem is that because we have so much pesticides in our soil, we erode the topsoil completely. And once the topsoil is gone, there's no nutrients in it and we can't grow in it. And it takes generations to bring that back. So innovation would simply be doing it organically or growing with polycultures. So you're growing more than one crop on the field, and that's a natural way of deterring pests because you almost have like distraction crops there. So that's one way. The other way would be regenerative regenerative farming, which again focuses on soil health first and everything else comes secondary. Next question, will all technology we have available, shouldn't we be in a better position in our relationship with it? Yes, with all the technology we do have, with globalization of social media and everything else, information sharing, we should have a better relationship with food. But it only took really one generation to disrupt what our relationship was. And that was through convenience, and that was through misinformation campaigns. So everyone always says, where does protein come from? Where do you get this? So we really lost a sense of nutritional value, which was carried down from generation to generation and then was given after to corporations to control, which again was really much based on profit. So we weren't really given a chance in this last generation to know any better. But I think now we're coming back around, and hopefully with conversations like these, we help spread the message. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. That's my time. I really appreciate you tuning in. I hope you have a great weekend and talk soon.